T-minus 30 seconds. T-minus 20 seconds. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Trap Talk Reptile Network, the coolest reptile network in the world. Welcome to All Monitor Talk. I'm your host, Kat, and with me is Mike Stefani. Please do me a favor and drop a like and subscribe if you enjoy this podcast. Welcome, guys. I'm excited. Mike, take it away.
Okay, here we go. So at the usual spiel, anybody keeping any kind of reptiles, amphibians, creepy crawlies, birds, fish, whatever it is, join USR. Go to their website, hit any of the tiers to become a member. And if you're at a show, donate animals, products, whatever for any of the auctions. We need all your support to fight these creepy reptile laws that come through in the middle of the night. We got a new regime in the office, so I'm not quite sure how this is going to go with these new guys, but man, they're always up to something. So join USR today.
All right, guys. So with us today is Dr.Scott Stahl. Welcome. We're so happy to have you with us.
Hey, great to be here, guys. Thank you.
Hi, Dr. Scott. You're looking good there, buddy.
What's up, buddy? Trying to look good for you guys this morning.
Thank you.
Yes,
So, we had talked, and I hope you will agree to come back because, like I say, we do this show. It's an hour long. We hit the people hard with some, quick information for an hour and 15 minutes, something like that. So as we dive deeper into veterinarian medicine as correlates with monitor lizards, we would like to have you back again, when your time allows it. But so for today, what I was thinking is, I get a lot of questions online about, I got the peach throat monitor. I just had it imported and it's wheezing and it's not eating. And so go through a typical, and then people ask me what I do. And I don't like to tell people anymore. I quit doing that whole vet thing because I'm not qualified. What works for me, I've been doing it for many years, so I kind of know what I'm doing with that. However, I always tell people, man, go find you a good vet in your area and listen to the protocol that they set forth for you, any of their testings. So what, typical imported animal, shoot.
Great question, buddy. Yeah, so when we're talking monitor lizards, obviously, we made great inbounds, right? And we've got people like yourself and Nick and a whole variety of people that are just, really doing a fantastic job breeding these animals. And wow, it's going to make a big difference for us, right? Because we're going to have animals that haven't gone through the stress of being collected in the wild. And then, as we all know, part of that whole issue is the transit time when these animals are being, basically bagged and held in the country of origin for weeks to maybe months or whatever, without water, without food, and then the shipping to get them here, and then wherever they are as they're coming in, the stress. So by the time we get our hands on some of these animals, we know they've been through a great deal, right? And so we worry about, things like kidney damage from being severely dehydrated and the amount of stress that's been put on those animals, their organ systems, et cetera. So that's the one thing you kind of have to keep in mind, is that know that those animals have been through a lot of stress. And so yes, we're typically going to need to treat them for a variety of parasites, right? Because coming out of the wild, we know like nematode, roundworms type parasites, cestodes, which be your tapeworms that they're going to potentially have, and then sometimes an imbalance of what we call flagellate organisms also would be something that we're dealing with. So you've got all these different things that are in the mix. However, if the animals are dehydrated and stressed and emaciated, and they've gone, then probably the last thing we want to do is immediately blast them with these really, really tough drugs. You know, these drugs are hard on their bodies, and they have to be metabolized by their kidneys and their liver, potentially, depending on what drugs we're using. So I still think it's not a bad idea when possible. You know, we could probably spend an hour talking about quarantine. So obviously we want to quarantine any new animals that come into the collection from, any wild-caught monitor that you bring in. We certainly want to keep it separate from our established monitors that we have in the collection. And during that time, that's when maybe getting them hydrated, removing some of the stress that these animals have gone through, maybe a meal or two, and knowing that they're settled in and established. And then we might consider doing our prophylactic, protocols for worming and for treating parasites. So in a perfect world, what we try to do, we realize that it's not a perfect world by any stretch, is that we would try to do fecal evaluations of these animals before we just hit them with the drugs, right? But we realize that sometimes that isn't easy to do, or it's not available, or there's not access to it. So what we tend to do is knowing that the majority of these animals are going to have these organisms, is that we do this sort of prophylactic protocol. But let's just say if we're going to talk, we might as well start with talking about what the best things to do are, and then we can work our way from there. And that would be, collecting some fresh fecal samples to get to your vet, so that we can analyze those for you and say, yes, there are nematode roundworm parasites in this animal, or we're seeing cestode, tapeworm eggs in the stool, etc. Or there's imbalances that are there that we know we have to fix. One thing to keep in mind when we're looking for flagellates, though, that sample has to be very fresh. Okay, so you have to, in order to look at the protozoal flora of a monitor lizard, we need a poop literally right out of the chute, right? So that'd be something you'd have to take it to the vet, and while you're there, it would hopefully pass some stool, or we can do something called a colonic wash, where we gently sort of flush some warm saline into the cloaca, and then we can massage out a sample, and then we can check for flagellate overgrowth there. So that's the perfect scenario. We get a fresh sample. We run that. We do what's called a fecal float, and we also do something called a direct, where there's two ways to analyze that stool. One is looking for the worm parasites and those eggs. The reason we float them is because when you put the stool into this float solution, it's a very high osmotic solution, usually a sugar or a salt solution, and it causes the eggs that are in that stool to float to the top. And then we have a little cover slip on top that we call it, and the eggs stick to the bottom of that, and then we put that under the microscope, and then that's how we can look for our parasite eggs. So, and then the direct is, again, for the flagellates or for protozoa. We get that fresh sample, we put a little bit of that on a slide, we add a little bit of warm saline to that, stir it up, and then we put a cover slip, and we look right away. And if that thing is just teeming with all kinds of protozoa swimming around, then we know that's an imbalance. Remember now, protozoa or flagellates are a normal part of their physiology, though. Okay, we don't try to kill all the protozoa. That's a commensal organism. So what we're trying to do is get that back into a balance, not completely eliminate that. Now that's different than the worms typically. Like, we don't want tapeworms in our monitors, and we don't want nematodes, et cetera, in those guys. So that's different. But for the flagellates, it's important to understand that we're not trying to completely eliminate all those. We're trying to get them back into a normal number. And when they go through the stress of being imported and all that, then that's when there's an imbalance. And next thing you know, you got these really high flagellate values there. So that's where we would consider treating that. So again, in a perfect world, that's what we would probably try to do. And then we can pick and choose the drugs that make the most sense. And then maybe we can minimize the amount of drugs that we actually have to give that animal, so that we're not, again, putting it through undue stress, right? So, but if that's not the case, let's say you've worked with your veterinarian and we found these organisms. So there are typically protocols that we use. One that we've all used for many years is fenbendazole. Panacur is the name of that. That's an anti-nematode type medication. It's kind of sort of tried and true. There's actually a few studies that have been done with that in reptiles. So we've got a little bit of research to show that it can be effective. And so that usually is something where you may treat for, there's a variety of different treatments. My personal treatment is I usually treat once every 7 days for 3 treatments, which is different than what some people do, but that's kind of my standard protocol. There's also some newer anti-nematode type medications that are out there that we've been working with. There's a drug that's very similar to fenbendazole. It's called oxfendazole, and we've been using more of this oxfendazole. It tends to fenbendazole has to be metabolized by the liver, and then it turns into an active component that kills the parasites. With oxfendazole, you don't have that transfer, that metabolism step through the liver. So for maybe an animal that has some minor liver damage, again, from being imported, the oxfendazole might be a better choice for that animal. So we're using more of that. And we found in some reptiles, there might be some resistance to fenbendazole or Panacur now. So we're looking at these other anti-parasitic drugs. And then ivermectin is also a drug that's sometimes been used. But again, ivermectin, though it can be quite effective, there have been some cases where there's been deaths associated with certain lizard species giving ivermectin. Probably my assumption on some of that may be because some of those animals may have actually been in the scenario that we talked about, where maybe they weren't in the best health when the drug was given. But I'm a little more cautious with ivermectin. I'd prefer to use one of those other two drugs first, especially for a wild-caught animal. Yeah, go ahead.
So to denounce some of the common myths with these dewormings and establishing your animals, I know a lot of people, they talk about Panacur and metronidazole, and they use that and they feel very safe. And when they tell me, I'm like, well, you haven't dealt with the cestoids yet. Am I right
Correct.
in saying that?
Yes, you're correct.
So
the only
it's like they skip a whole process.
Yes.
And that's the worst, in my opinion, that's the worst process because, tapeworms are taking from your animal.
That is correct. So the drug that we use for that is a drug called praziquantel.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so Dronzit or praziquantel is the drug of choice for
I love that stuff.
Yeah, and so yes, it is. Again, if you were trying to let's just say we were trying to make sure that we had no parasites and we were trying to completely deworm a monitor lizard, coming from the Philippines or wherever, right? We would probably want to be pretty aggressive in our approach, and we would probably want to cover both the roundworms and the flatworms, which are the cestodes, right? And so we would probably be treating with Panacur and praziquantel or Dronzit. The Dronzit is usually we give it once and then we repeat that in 2 weeks. That's kind of the protocol.
And is that to ensure that any eggs that remain are dead, a next generation of cestode?
Well, the nice thing about cestodes is that, remember, cestodes require an intermediate host, so the good news is once those animals are in captivity, they're not going to there's not a direct infection to themselves from it. Unfortunately, like some of the nematodes that we deal with, the roundworms have a direct life cycle. So that monitor passes stool into its environment. You don't clean it up right away, and it tongue flicks around the cage, and then it actually ingests some of the oocysts, and it reinfects itself with that parasite. And that's when we can actually get into a lot more trouble, because then we end up with what's called a super infection, right? Where we get a whole lot more worms than they're supposed to be in there. Because, in the wild, these animals are living with these parasites in their body, right? And that's normal, right? But what happens in the wild is when they defecate or pass urate, they're not confined to a space where they're interacting with their own stool. They're passing the stool and then they're moving away, right? So they're not coming in contact with their own feces typically, right? And so that's the way that they don't end up with these super infections. Plus the stress of captivity makes them more vulnerable to things like that too. Yes, go ahead.
You suggest then that whenever you first acquire wild caught, which this is actually something that I do, is I will put them in a temporary setup so that, during the treatment process, I can take them out and put them somewhere else so they don't recontaminate themselves after treatment. That's just something that I do. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that's all. That makes sense. Like when we're in quarantine, one of the problems with the naturalistic enclosures that we're all trying to get to, which I think is wonderful in a lot of ways, we're trying to do our best, right, to give these animals environments that are closest to, what they have in the wild. But we also have to understand that when we're treating them for these parasites and things, we don't want to have these like mulch and naturalistic things in there, because they're just going to contaminate that soil with the potential ova of these worms that we're trying to treat. So what I typically recommend is during the quarantine period, just keep it very simplistic, right? And maybe we're using paper toweling or newspaper, or something that you can dispose of, whether it's some kind of turf material. Even if it is a bedding, then you just need to be willing to completely change it out frequently. And what I usually do is every time I do a treatment, I try to clean the enclosure completely after that treatment. And then if I treat it again a week later, I'll clean the enclosure again. So you want to make it so that you can fairly easily do that. Now, that's in a perfect world, right? Sometimes that's challenging to do, but it is a good idea to try to disinfect and clean the enclosure in between those treatments, so that we can really do our best to eliminate the reinfection that we talked about. Now, again, the good news is we don't have to worry about reinfection with cestodes, right? With the tapeworms, those eggs have to be ingested by another creature or whatever, and then the lizard has to eat that creature in order to get reinfected. So the nice thing about, once we've taken them out of the wild, we don't have to worry about tapeworms or whatever, because they're after we treat them. So, and that's another good way. Like if someone tells you they bought a captive bred monitor lizard, and then we do a fecal on it and there's tapeworm eggs in there, then we know right away that I'm very sorry, but no, this is not.
Yeah.
Which we all know the story on that anyway. There's depending on how much you paid for
farm bred.
If somebody hatched that beautiful animal, they're going to ask a fair amount for it, because they worked their buns off to have that kind of success, right? As we know. So, but that's all. That should be part of our initial quarantine, I think, is trying to make sure that we've rid these guys of these parasites, right, during that period of time. So you're looking at about a 3 to 4 week protocol. And again, if we're talking about quarantine, everybody talks the quarantine, the longer the better, right? So we talk about 3 months, 6 months, up to a year, right? But a lot of us, it's challenging to pull that off. So we do the best we can, right? So bare minimum, what we'd like to do is, if it can be 6 to 8 weeks, and we can treat the animals and maybe check a fecal or two during that period of time, if that's the best that we can do, then that's certainly better than not doing that and putting them right in the environment, right? So, so that's a big part of it. And then, sort of the stress to the animal, trying to minimize the stress to the animal is very important. And then we can also do, after we've done these worming protocols, we can do follow-up fecal exams just to make sure. And again, the golden rule on that is you're supposed to have 3 negative fecal samples. This is what is taught in veterinary school, or this is what zoos do with their quarantine. They have 3 negative fecal samples before they declare that hopefully they're free of parasites. And we all know even that isn't 100%, but it's a pretty good way to evaluate where you're at with it. One other thing about fecals that I think is really important that a lot of people don't get, which I think is really useful, is, so whenever I do a lot of consulting for collections, and one of the things that we do, that people shipping me things. A lot of times it's live animals, but sometimes we get these beautiful packages and we're all excited thinking there's like chocolates or sweets inside, and it's a bag full of fecal samples from one of my clients. It's not fun, but it's important, right? So the one thing to remember is that these, for fecal float, now not for the direct samples. Remember the direct, we need that right out of the animal's rear end, right, to look for the flagellates, and the protozoa. But for our fecal floats, for the cestode eggs and for the nematode eggs, if we get a sample and we can cool that in the refrigerator, that can last for at least a month or so, and we can still read that sample. So what I try to get my breeders to do, or my clients with larger collections, I say, look, just over a month period, just collect fresh poop from anybody that gives it, and then put it in a plastic bag, label it up with the animal's name, maybe a second double bag it, right? And then put that in a bigger bag in the refrigerator and make sure that's properly labeled so it doesn't end up in someone's lunch bag or whatever. That wouldn't be good. And then you can send like 20 samples to us at a time that you've collected up over a month, and then you can overnight that or send it, 2-day priority or whatever. And then it's very worthwhile instead of sending individual samples. So you can collect up samples from your animals around the collection. Now, when you collect the sample, a couple tricks here. One is it can't be all dried up hard as a brick. It needs to be still moist and soft. And we don't need a bucket full. I always tell people, like, about the size of a nickel or a quarter, a nice little chunk of stool, not the urate material. Remember, we want to separate the white, yellowish urates from the fecal material. And what I usually do is I take a moistened paper towel, and you put that little nugget in the middle of the moistened paper towel and just kind of roll it up in there. And then that keeps the stool moist, right? Because we need it to stay moist. And then you put that inside the Ziploc baggie, and then maybe a double Ziploc because it is going to go in the refrigerator, and then into a bigger bag and in the refrigerator. And then you can collect those up and send them to us, and we can run those samples, and we can look for the parasites and try to figure out where we stand. So that way there's no excuse as in, oh, you know, I can't get it today or tomorrow. You can do it that way and collect things up, and that way we can get some information. So, okay.
Well, when you had said, like, during your quarantine period, you know, after, I don't know, several weeks or a week or whatever the case may be, and you disinfect your enclosure, chlorhexidine, or you got something better? What would you recommend for sterilization?
The good news is most of these parasites that we're talking about today are all going to respond to almost all of your disinfectants. You know what I mean? So bleach solution, chlorhexidine, Rocal, any of those types of disinfectants will work. The key thing about disinfection that people sort of miss, I think, there's a few points. One is that disinfectants don't work through organic material. Okay, so you have to understand, you can't, if there's all this dried poop all over the enclosure and you just spray that on and then you assume you've disinfected, but what you have to do is you have to get in there with some elbow grease and clean all the urates and feces out. And then once you've done that, that's when you can use soap and water for that, right? Then you spray on your disinfectant of choice, right? And then the rule of thumb is a minimum of 15 to 20 minutes of contact with that disinfection before it will actually do its job, right? And then you can rinse that out or sponge that out, right? So now you probably don't need to do that between every single cleaning. If we're in our quarantine period and we're doing that clean between the wormings, that's what I would do. I would give it the real good. But again, when we're working with our animals, you know, we don't need to be doing that on a weekly basis or whatever. But when we do change out our mulch or whatever, and you really want to disinfect, or if you're, you know, going to put a new animal into an enclosure with another animals, then you'd want to go through that process before you would do that. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. So let me ask you a question. So over the years, I kind of, when I bred my Mertens, I mean, I've had so many Mertens. At one point, I had 50 hatchlings here, captive born hatchlings. And, you know, I mean, 50 in a 40-gallon Exoterra style enclosure, that gets quite dirty really quick. A lot of shed skins in there. It becomes quite messy. So I was trying to come up with a way to keeping it more sanitary, and then also not during the cleaning process to not stress my animals out as much. So I came up with my Mike's Monitor socialization caging system, in which I utilize a all water bottom with a drain valve, and I separated 25 babies and I put them in that, and then I put the other 25, I split them up. Normal, you know, mulch or I don't use mulch, so dirt on the bottom, compared to the all water bottom with a very simple setup. And what I noticed with that is, you know, it started off as ease of maintenance, and then I noticed after a short time, the 25 that were in the all water bottom with a real simple setup compared to the other ones that are in your typical, you know, monitor setup, the ones with the all water bottom were like, you know, they had no fear. They would come to me through the water and like little seals, and they would just sit there and like beg for food. So, the all water bottom, it kind of meets their security needs psychologically to these animals, and it really helps them settle in and become calm. Where on the dirt, when you open the cage, they're bolting off the walls, and it's not so much they're afraid in that cage. They just don't have a place that registers in their brain as safety to get away from you in. So this worked out really well. And from there, I had gotten my first Toji's from a friend of mine. And, you know, he was telling me how, you know, that's been a 30-year project for me. I love him from seeing him in one little picture, blah, blah. Everybody knows the story. So I said to myself, what if you made a larger socialization caging system for these adult wild caught animals that were coming in. So I did that, and sure as shit, you know, in a maybe a couple months time, these Togianus, which are very aggressive lizards, really calm down. They settle down. They feel safe in the water. And so the person I had got them from told me, you know, when he puts his hand on a doorknob into his room, as soon as he turns the doorknob, he can hear him bouncing off the walls. So by doing this socialization system with the water on the bottom, you know, it really helped them settle in because they felt security, you know, as their escape route water. But now when I'm hearing you talk, I don't know, what do you think of that as like, now I'm talking about for, you know, water types, forest type monitors, you know, not Ackies or something like that. The ease of cleaning this might be a good thing for, you know, like I did with my Togies. I had to treat them just like any other wild caught animal. But when you drain the water and you go in there with chlorhexidine and you spray it all around, you scrub it out, rinse it, fill it back up, that sounds like a pretty good way to do that during your quarantine period.
Excellent. See, this is why that we all love you so much. You're just such a god. I mean, you know, like Mertens monitors. Who thought we'd ever have those and be able to breed them? And look what you've done here, right? And so we appreciate all the time and energy you put into, you know, crafting this and figuring, you know, cracking the nut on this so that we can all. I mean, if I could have Mertens monitors here, I would consider it. But it is a lot of work. But we do love them. I think exactly what you've said. I think a couple of things. One of the things I always try to do with those situations is that I try to double up everything. You know what I mean? So if you had two of everything for these guys, so when you go to do you literally transfer them into and maybe that's what you're already doing.
I have several.
You're already doing that. And so basically then you transfer and then you can wash and clean and do your disinfection. You get that guy sitting over there doing its thing. And then you just keep going back and forth. Kind of like a lot of us do that's what I do with my crickets, right? You instead of trying to clean those disgusting crickets out around it, you just lift into one tub and then you clean that one and you just keep going back and forth. So that, I think it costs more money to have a double setup for everything, you know, but I think that's the easiest way for you to achieve that ability to completely, you know, disinfect between those treatments and stuff. But I love that. It makes perfect sense to me too, what you're saying about the socialization, right? These animals are comfortable in the water. When they're on that land, they feel intimidated and scared. And, you know, so the fact that you were able to figure that out, it makes perfect sense and it's remarkable. Yeah.
Well,
but yeah.
Well, no, you go. You're the guest. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, you know, obviously, you know, the concern would be that they're all in there together. So if they're passing stool into the water, they're going to expose each other, right? More so in that water environment. But I think the trade-off is that those animals are going to be, their chance for survival and for the stress to be less and all that is worth that exposure. And then as long as if we keep shifting like that and we keep treating, then we should be able to eventually eliminate them passing the parasites into the water. And then hopefully we're good to go. And that can happen during that quarantine period.
So basically what you're saying is if you're pretty vigilant with your water changes and you're disinfecting, this is a good idea, maybe as much as your normal setup or maybe more better than your typical substrate on the bottom, you know, type setup.
Well, I'd probably have to defer to you on that part, but from what again, because let's just say you're talking about semi-aquatic monitors, right? That's what we're talking about.
Forest type. Yeah.
And for them, I think it makes a lot of sense just on everything you told me. Obviously, like you said, you know, we wouldn't have like Kingorum or, you know, swimming around in a water bath or whatever, right? Or, you know, like a Kimberly Rock monitor.
I do have a socialization caging system for dry species too.
Well, we should hear about that as well. Or maybe you've already shared that. I don't know.
I've shared that a lot. Yeah. It's all on my website and stuff, but it's basically a very simple setup. That's bottom line, you know, because what I found with people is, you know, you'll get, and I'm not talking about wild caught. We'll just stick with captive born for right now.
Okay.
You get this animal and you put it in this big fancy jungle looking setup, and you come down one day, you don't see your lizard. You come down another day, you don't see your lizard. So now you're thinking, oh, I wonder if he's okay. And you take this log out, you take this plant out, you remove everything, and you still can't find your lizard. I always tell people, look under your water dish first, not last. Because 90% of the time they're hiding under that water bowl because it's holding humidity. It's a nice, secure place for them, just like dark water, you know. So you basically showed your animal that no matter where he goes to feel secure, you know, the giant hairy monkey can find you, like King Kong. He's tearing Tokyo apart or whatever. But so yeah, it's more about like real simplicity. And then once you get your animals to where when you come to the front of the cage, they run to you to see what you're up to. They're not necessarily coming for food. They're interested in what you're doing. When you get them to that point, I tell people, put them in a jungle. And whenever you come and you open that cage door, they're going to come running to you. You don't have to look for them. You don't have to scare them.
I agree with that.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And I think it comes back to the whole, you know, I think the benefit of the socialization is well worth them being exposed to each other, right? And if you're saying these are captive animals anyway, a lot of these maybe are animals you've hatched or whatever. If we've treated the parents and done a proper quarantine, like if we've been keeping our ducks in a row all along, then we really don't need to worry too much about having them in there together. And the benefit of them having that social interaction that allows them to adapt better and do better makes perfect sense. And then, you know, the key thing about the enclosure, I'm glad you brought that up, because it's one of the things that always worries me nowadays, you know, that people get a new reptile and then they get this, because everybody always says it needs to be massive and it needs to be planted and this and that, but they don't really understand that sometimes in this initial phase, we need to make sure the animals are eating and drinking and that they're finding the heat, you know, and they're basking so there might be a period of time where we need to get that animal acclimated and so we can see what its stool looks like when they go to the bathroom. You know, if it's taking a dump in the very back of that cage, we can't see what the stool looks like. We have no idea if there's blood in the stool or if it's undigested or if they regurgitated a meal. We have no idea. So that's where, honestly, the quarantine time where we're keeping them, there's still good places to hide. There's security, right? But we're able to kind of see if that animal is eating, drinking, defecating normally, how it's adapting. And then once it gets used to us too, then like you said, Mike, that's when we can put them in this wonderful enclosure, especially when we know they're free of parasites and all that. So I feel like there's a stepping stone to getting them into these enclosures sometimes. And I feel like a lot of newbies think they feel pressure that they have to do it immediately. And sometimes as we more seasoned people understand that sometimes that's not the best thing, right?
Right.
Especially if you're new to the hobby, right?
Absolutely.
I always try to tell people too, like, you know, with these animals first coming to your home, and this is with wild caught as well as captive bred, sometimes the stress of being shipped, or maybe it's the cold weather or whatever, they can be prone to get respiratory infections. So like whenever you get them home, it's like super important to be watching them for like the first week or two, you know, for those signs of respiratory infection. Like, you know, are they being lethargic? Are they, you know, breathing with their mouth slightly open? Are they puffing? You know, when they're drinking water, is like all this mucus coming out? Like, you know, because I don't know, with the respiratory infections, it's like if you see that they're starting to be lethargic, there's a very small window, you know, to get them antibiotics and get them to the vet because they decline so fast, you know?
Well,
Yes,
you know, I'm not sure. We'll ask Scott, Dr. Scott. Being that monitor lizards are a much higher metabolism animal than like constrictor type snakes that do a lot of laying around and you know, reserving energy and whatnot. With monitor lizards, you know, when you have something go like a respiratory infection, it, like Kat's saying, it seems to perpetuate really fast, and because of their metabolism, I would assume.
Well, I think what happens with a lot of reptiles, and so if I showed you what the lungs of a monitor looked like at surgery or on a post-mortem exam, they're basically like big air bags, like sacks, okay? And again, remember, they don't have a diaphragm, right? So you don't have an ability to cough appropriately. Like there's just these big, and what happens a lot of times with these large sort of like bag type simple structures of the lungs is that it takes a lot of mucus and fluid to accumulate in that lung before the animal might begin to show symptoms. And so by the time we're seeing like that, like Kat said, that the mouth slightly popped open, or maybe they'll make a little popping sound, or you can hear a slight sound, or there's fluid kind of draining out, or maybe a little bit coming out the nares. There's been a tremendous amount of buildup of this fluid and mucus and inflammation in those lungs, and now we're finally beginning to see it. So I think they're just very good at hiding it from us to start with, you know. And then by the time we recognize it, there is a lot of pathology or inflammation in those lungs, and we've got to jump in and be super aggressive to try to get it out, right? And then again, they can't expel it, they can't cough. They'll still, I'm sure those of you who have monitors, they do what looks like a cough, right? But they don't do it as well as we do. They don't have that muscular diaphragm to be able to, you know, push those lungs forward and expel that material out, you know? So it just makes it that much more challenging to clear these guys of these infections, right? So I think that's kind of the trick. And again, as you're saying, if we're not seeing them ever because they're hiding under their water bowl, we are not going to pick up on that until they're moribund or until they're so bad that, you know, which is why, again, we vets get the bad rap, because you guys wait and you bring it to us. It's literally dying, and we give it a shot, it dies. And then whose fault is it? That's the vet's fault. The vet killed it.
Yeah.
That horrible shot killed my lizard. It's like, no, sorry, guys. We really didn't kill it. It's been dying for a few weeks now. And we tried to. So, but this is what happens. And then that perpetuates that veterinarians kill lizards and we shouldn't go there, right? So, anyway, but I'm not trying to, you know where I'm going with this. It's insidious. It's insidious.
You know, to kind of build on what you had just said, what I find, especially with, you know, my daughter, she's a vet tech, and, you know, my wife is a crazy dog lady. We work very closely with our dog vet. And, you know, I got to say, in talking with you too, Scott, I know you love animals and you love reptiles. That's your gig. However, when you sound like you were offended when you hear that, oh, the vet killed it. Because I know the passion that you have for these animals and for saving these animals, for treating these animals. So it's very unfair for people to do that to vets. I mean, they want the best. It's not their fault that we bring them late, you know?
Yeah, and a lot of people do that. They'll wait until the last moment. They'll email all of us first, right? They'll message all of us. Hey, can you help me? My lizard's doing this, or, you know, whatever. And we're like, you know, trying to tell them. And like with me, I always tell people, take it to the vet, take it to the vet. And they just wait. They wait until it's almost dead. And then they're like, oh, okay, I'm going to take it. And by then it's too late.
Yeah, now the vet has a big challenge ahead of him. Not only is he treating something, but he's treating something in late stages. So, you know, you got to kind of use your head.
Yeah, he, like you said, he or she. Actually, there are more female veterinarians in the country than there are male now, so we have to make sure we say he or she. But you're absolutely right. So it's frustrating because, well, first of all, every vet that they're all sincere and they love animals, and there are very few vets that are out there trying to just take money from you. I'm sorry, guys, that's just not, you know, that's what you hear all the time. It's just not true. No. Some of the hardest working people on the planet and some of the lowest paid for what we do, you know. And remember, these vets are coming out of school with like $300,000-$400,000 of debt, and it's just. So anyway, I can promise you that one of the best running deals in medicine is veterinary medicine, you know. And it's expensive for certain things, but it's a pretty good bargain for the buck when you compare it to the human health side of things, you know. And so, so part of the frustration is it is true. You know, I always tell people I was a herpetoculturist before I became a vet. You know, I was a reptile. I'm like one of you guys first. And then I was like, okay, I love this so much, I want to be a reptile vet. And then I went off to vet school and one of the lucky people that gets to do what I do. But my veterinary practice is all exotic animals. You know, we don't do dogs and cats, and we only do, I'm board certified with birds as well. So we do a lot of parrots and, you know, cockatiels, macaws, conures, and then we do a lot of rabbits and ferrets and guinea pigs, and then, you know, all the reptiles that we see, right? And so, you know, I will say across the board, almost all the exotic animals, there's a lot more death that goes on because, again, not only with reptiles, but with birds and rabbits, most of these animals aren't telling us they're sick. Because in the wild, if they're acting sick, they're going to get eaten by a predator, except for maybe, you know, our larger monitors and stuff, right? So they're going to hide it. So as compared to a dog and cat veterinarian, we in the exotic animal field, we deal with a lot more death in practice. We get a lot more emergencies. And when things are coming in, they're usually sort of dying as they're coming in. They've been dying, and that's why they're presenting sick, you know? And so it doesn't make that, it makes it that much more difficult. But again, our practice, we have, I can't keep counting. I think it's eight other veterinarians doing all exotic animals. So there's 9 of us in the practice total with almost 50 employees, you know? And so we have people that come from long distances, and we have people that ship reptiles and stuff to us to do the work. But it's a niche, right? And so the frustrating thing is I realize there's never going to be a reptile vet on every corner like there is dog or cat, you know, that's frustrating. But there is an association of reptile and amphibian veterinarians, which is a very strong group where every year we have a conference that we all go to, and we share our information with each other. I gave a few lectures this year to our group on like ball python, strongyloidy, you know, there's all these things that we're sort of trying to share with each other. And so there's a network now of these veterinarians. And so you can actually go to the ARAV website, which USARC has posted at the bottom of all their emails, which we greatly appreciate Phil doing that, where you can look to see where the closest, you know, reptile vet might be near you, right? So they're out there. The other thing is I get this, you hear all the time how like people think that veterinarians, that we don't have any knowledge, we don't know anything. And so like, shameless plug that I'll mention here is, so this is a textbook or whatever that we published back in 2019 that I was a co-editor on with Dr. Divers from University of Georgia. And we have 120 authors that are part of this that we edit. And I just want to show you how thick this book is. This is almost 1,600 pages, okay? And this is all like every topic you can think of, from CT scans to oncology to dermatology. So when people say I listen to some of these podcasts, and you know that we don't know anything about reptiles, and here's a textbook. You know, took me 3 years to edit this thing and to write a bunch of the chapters in here. So Amazon, you can buy this for, I think it used to be $180 when we first started. So, but now it's like $135 on Amazon or whatever. And I think I get $1 or whatever for each one that's sold. So I don't get paid a lot, but I spent 3 years of my life working on it. And I think every herpetoculturalist that really wants to be doing that, they should have this book. Because it's a, thank you. Yeah.
Yes,
thanks, Kat.
I do.
It's a great reference. Yeah.
I did get to the vet with me with some, like, because I've moved around a lot. And so, like, you know, with the military and stuff, but every time I go, you know, I don't always get the chance to find, you know, maybe someone who's experienced. So I will bring the vet manual with me. And since I have a lot of experience, I'm like, hey, you know, this is what I'm seeing. Can you do this? Can you look at, you know, and I'll show them where stuff
which is great. And they know you're serious. Like, I mean, the hope was that, like, this is like the main textbook for reptile and amphibian medicine. So hopefully most veterinarians that are treating reptiles are going to have this book, right? But if you come in and you've already read through some of it, or it gives you like, okay, something's happening at home, right? You can open to, you know, like I wrote the chapter in here on reproductive disease. So if you have a dystocia in a lizard or a snake, you can open it up and look, and I've got it all written out with a lot of pictures of surgeries and how we put this. So the information is out there. I think that the problem is it sort of just gets overlooked as, oh, we don't, you know, vets don't know anything about reptiles, you know. And I will tell you that, you know, so for instance, I'm board certified with birds, and to be honest with you, there's about 15 different species of parrot that we work on. There's not very many, right? You know, you got macaws and cockatoos and cockatiels. And so once you kind of learn the first 10 or 15 of those, you're going to be pretty comfortable as an avian doctor, right? I mean, we also see, you know, some avian vets do, you know, raptors and things like that. We do some of those. But so the point is, though, is we have, 10,000 reptile species now we have. So to be a good reptile vet, it's a lot more challenging, because you're not going to be able to be a great reptile vet from doing it out of a book. I mean, you can certainly do your best, right? But the way to really do it is to keep the animals. It's one of the reasons why I've kept, you know, hundreds of species of reptiles through my entire career, because I always felt like if I can keep it and breed it myself, then when I'm talking to you about that species and I can tell you that I've actually produced it, then you're going to have a lot more confidence in me, right?
Absolutely.
And so there are more and more veterinarians that are trying to do that as well. Now, I won't live long enough to breed all 10,000 species, unfortunately. But you got guys like Uncle Mike doing some amazing things, right? So the point is, though, we share the information, right? And but I want to let everybody know that there are lots of things that we do CT scans routinely, like for turtles and tortoises, like the most difficult patient in the world. You've got like this, it's like box with legs coming out of it, right? And so we use CT scans now primarily to look inside that shell and figure out what's going on in these animals' bodies. And so one of the best ways that we can do that, So we've really come a long way. Our anesthesia now with reptiles, we can do surgery, we do lots of surgery, So anyway, there's just a lot that can be done if you give it a chance,
With that being said, Doc, is the anesthesia that you use on herps nowadays? You had made mention it's come a long way. Is it? I don't know. What does it do? It builds up lactic acid, or what? Why has it been very detrimental to put an animal under anesthetic? In the past, as compared to what you're saying now.
So a couple of things. Like one of the things to keep in mind about anesthesia is that anesthesia is a way of killing the animal without actually killing the animal. That's kind of that's a very rough way of saying it, but you're using drugs that are, basically disassociating the brain from the body. And, and a lot of the anesthetics that were used in the old days now, like one of the ones, we actually use that as a euthanasia solution now, it's called Euthisol or whatever. And sodium pentobarbital, that used to be used as an anesthetic. And then we realized that, it's too dangerous because we're losing and this is way back, right? So the idea is that what we're doing is we're titrating these drugs so that we're giving just enough that the animal can be under the anesthetic, that we can do the things we need to do, but then we can still wake them up, right? And there's been a lot of research in using a large variety of anesthetics in reptiles over the last 10 or 15 years. And when I say we've come a long way, and these are all drugs that are used in humans, and in dogs and cats. They just trickle down to us. And then we just have to, like you said already, the metabolic systems of these reptiles are totally different. So what we've had to do is sort of figure that out for reptile. What's the proper dose? How often is it given? That kind of thing. And we've just made a lot of progress. And now we intubate these animals. We're breathing for them. They're on gas anesthetics. We're using injectable anesthetics, sometimes in combination with those things. We have, like, when we have a snake or a lizard under anesthesia, we've got all the monitors hooked up. We're looking at the SpO2 and the oxygen and, the heart rate, with a Doppler. So all these things are being monitored now, and we can titrate that anesthesia just to the right amount. So to be honest with you, reptiles typically don't die under anesthesia from the anesthesia. Almost everyone that dies, I always try, whenever I lose a patient under anesthesia, I always try to ask the owner if we can do a free post-mortem exam after, because I feel terrible. I'm gutted. They're gutted. And I want to try to figure out, why did that happen when I've done this 100 times in other lizards and never had that? And almost every time when they allow me to do that, we find that there was an underlying disease process that we didn't know about. Like the kidneys were damaged, the liver was abnormal, there was a heart problem. And we weren't able to detect that prior to surgery. But then when we did the anesthesia, the animal couldn't survive because it had this secondary problem going on. We call it a comorbidity, when there's a second condition that's happening. And so almost always that's the case with birds, reptiles, rabbits, ferrets, all the other exotics we deal with. So I think we've come a long way with that. So when people say, they're nervous about, having us do surgery on their snake or lizard, that it doesn't make sense to me. Because we do very well with those things. Yeah.
With that being said, I just want to put it out there for my audience that you wonder why going to the vet costs some money. You just heard what the doctor said. You got to put your trust in the doctor. He's got your animal's life in his hand. He cares. So when he does a successful operation, surgery, procedure, whatever the case may be, and your animal comes back to you, man, you don't think that guy deserves his asking price? You're crazy. You know, don't be cheap. You know, and if you are cheap, I'd go get a goldfish or something. And even a goldfish deserves a good life. But
Yeah.
quit harping on vets and how much they charge you. You know, if you truly love your animals, you pay the money.
Yeah, and think
Yeah.
about this too. Okay, this is always like I really can't wrap my brain around this, but people will spend thousands of dollars on an animal and they won't spend, you know, the money to go to a vet. Why? Why not? Like, why not normalize, you know, taking reptiles to a vet? Why not spend that same amount of money? You spend all this money on the animal, you spend all this money on the setup. Why not spend a little bit more for the vet care? I mean, these animals can live, what, a couple decades, maybe more, depending on the species. Like, why not do that? You know, and sometimes in some cases, you know, they might not need surgery, they might not need x-rays or anything. Sometimes it's something as simple as, you know, treating a respiratory infection, treating a fungal infection, treating parasites, which when you leave, it's only going to be like a couple $100, right? I mean,
Yeah.
depending where you go. I mean, that's like nothing, you know, nothing.
Yeah, so that brings me to another thing. Thank you for the reminder there, Kat. So we're talking about monitor lizards here on All Monitor Podcast, and we have
Yeah.
Dr. Scott Stahl here, and I just wanted to say that you know, people really need to, and it's changing. It's really changing from, you know, I like to call them the good old days or the dark ages when, you know, when us as breeders were in competition with wild caught animals. However, now, you know, 90% of the things we work with are all captive born, you know, or could be, you know, but they're still wild caught. So people say to me, oh my God, you know, for example, $2,000 for a coming eye monitor. Well, this guy's got a wild caught one for 180. And I tell them, I'm like, you can buy mine, put it in your cage, listen to what I'm telling you about socializing that animal, and you're going to have a good animal, bulletproof for 20 years. However, you could go buy that $180 animal that you think you're saving, you know, what, $1,600, whatever the case may be. Now you notice, oh, it has a sneeze, or it's really lethargic. It's just laying there with its eyes closed. And they call me. Oh, well, you know what you should have done? You should have bought from me in the first place. But now what you got to do is you got to go to the vet. Now, and I tell them, I say, you walk into the vet's office with your animal. He hits you with whatever the case may be, a couple $100 charge. Now you wait in a waiting room with dogs barking all around you, and or whatever the case may be. And now the vet puts hands on that animal, hit it up with another couple $100, medicines, x-rays, time, whatever the case may be. You spent $2,000. You could have just bought from me, and you wait with the wild caught animal. You still might have a dead animal. When you buy from a breeder, you're paying a lot of money, but you're paying a lot of money for our time, our electricity, our food bill, and the fact that you're getting basically a bulletproof animal. So when I hear that cheapness about, well, I could get this one for, you know, half the price or whatever, good luck, because it's going to cost you in the end. So I just wanted to say that because I mean, there's so many people doing good things with monitor lizards. There's no need to buy anything wild caught anymore.
So
There's
agree.
really not.
Hey guys, we got a question. So Lucid Arboreal says, do they have a protocol to go over to see if maybe an animal should or shouldn't be put under anesthesia? So
we do. So the whole idea would be you would take your animal to the vet, and then the veterinarian is going to assess the patient, right? We're going to do what's called a physical exam, right? We're going to look that animal over from head to toe. And again, hopefully your veterinarian has some level of experience with reptiles or whatever. And so they know what a normal, healthy monitor might look like. And, you know, it's hard to get the mouth open. They're struggling against you, you know, and then, you know, if you feel like the animal looks healthy on the physical exam, let's say it's got like, let's say you're bringing in a monitor and it's ripped out its toenail and the toe's swollen, and you're going to have to amputate maybe the tip of the toe because it's got a bone infection or something, right? So we're going to assess the animal for general health, and then we typically do what's called a pre-surgical chemistry profile, okay? Where we're going to maybe take a blood sample from the animal and we can check the kidney function and the liver function, the electrolytes, just like they do with humans, to make sure that the animal is healthy in order to go under that anesthetic protocol. And if those and that's something we do in our office within an hour or so. So you bring it in, we examine it, we take a blood sample, we check it, and then maybe we could do surgery that afternoon, or we might be doing surgery the next day. So yes, there are ways that we can try to ensure that that lizard is in the best health that it can be in order to proceed. I will say that blood work in the chemistry profile in reptiles isn't as good. It's not as good as it is in mammals, okay? It's not like with dogs and cats or a human, you do a chemistry profile and you're going to have very, very specific guidelines for what the normals are. And if they don't fall in that very tight, category of normal, then you're going to know there's a problem. But you got to remember, we don't have a study where we've taken like 20 Kimberly rock monitors when they were healthy and pulled blood on all of them and then made a reference range, right? In reptiles, we don't have those types of things, right? So what we're doing is we're looking for extremes. Like if something is well out of a normal range, then we know there's a problem. And sometimes with lizards, for instance, you might have to have like 75% of that kidney function is no longer there before you might see an abnormality on a blood test, right? So it's not as accurate as we'd like it to be, but it does give us a point of reference. And if the animal looks healthy during the exam, and we do this pre-chemistry profile, then we're probably going to feel comfortable anesthetizing that Kimberly rock monitor and removing the tip of the toe or whatever, doing surgery on it, if you will. Or going, if it's a female with retained eggs, or if it's got egg yolk coelomitis, which is a very common female monitor lizard problem, we go in and we end up removing the reproductive tract, things of that nature. So we can do those things. So yes, we can try to be as safe as we can possibly be. I also want a couple of things. One of the things is I don't want to shame anybody here. We're not trying to say that you're not a good person if you don't take your animal to the vet. All we're trying to say is I think we need to open our minds to the idea that reptiles deserve good veterinary care. That's basically, they deserve it as much. If we love and have these passions for these animals like we do, and we're sitting here on a Saturday having a podcast about it, my God, don't you think we love them enough that they deserve medical care like every other creature in the world? Like your dog or your cat, or so. And I'm telling you through like this book as an example that we veterinarians, there's enough of us out there that love and have the passion like you guys do, that we're making progress. So I mean, and again, people always say, why isn't there more research? Well, the truth is that the only research that gets done on reptiles is because there's veterinarians usually in a university or in a private practice like myself that are really into reptiles, and we're doing it because we love it, because there's no money to be made, or there's very minimal support for this. Why do you think it took 30 years for us to figure out what was going on with inclusion body disease in boas? Because we didn't get them. Like, the research money has to come from us, the reptile people, in order for us to make advances. There's nobody out there, like the dog and cat world, you have all this research money that comes in, from the supportive characters, the dog food companies and the flea and tick product, they're all contributing. But we don't have that on the reptile side. So it's a very slow process, to make headway on that. But we are making headway. And most of the headway is from people that are passionate about these reptiles. At some of the veterinarians that I work with that are at universities, like Dr. Divers at the University of Georgia, he's as crazy about reptiles as I am. So we find research money, and then we pull off a study that we can publish that then helps to advance us, but it's a slow process. So the other thing I want to remind everybody is that when you go to the vet, most veterinarians we're going to, like in my practice, even though we have this big practice and we have all these we have CT scan and we have ultrasounds, we have endoscopes, and we can do all these things, but we're not going to look down on you if you don't. Like, the purpose is to have those so that if you want to do those things, if you're willing to have a CT scan done on your lizard because we can't figure out what's wrong with it, we have the ability to do that. But if you don't want to do, if you can't afford to do that, or you're uncomfortable doing that, we're going to do whatever we can to help you solve your reptile's problem with the amount of money that you're able to comfortably afford. And if maybe that's just my knowledge of looking at the animal and thinking it has a respiratory infection and just giving you the antibiotics, and you don't want to do blood work on that animal and you don't want to do x-rays, that's fine. You know, it still gives us a chance to help that animal have some level of professional care, you know, and most veterinarians are very much like that. You're not going to go in and they're going to take it in the back and come out with a $3,000 bill. No, they're going to say, hey, this is what we think, and this test is available. If you want to do it, this is how much it costs. This test is available. If you want to do that, that's how much it costs, you know, and then you can decide which of those you want to do, or we can just try this medication based on our knowledge, if you will. So most veterinarians are very willing to do that. A lot of veterinarians also are willing to consult. Like sometimes we'll consult with veterinarians. Like let's say you live, you know, somewhere in the U.S. very far from me in Washington. I'm in Washington, D.C., Northern Virginia area. And you have a veterinarian that's, maybe you take the book in and you're like, you know, Dr. Stahl, you can call him and consult with him about my animal. We do that, those types of things. There's a lot of other veterinarians that are very good with reptiles too, that are willing to help in that way too. So you can, like I do consulting for a couple of clients, ball python breeders in Europe. And obviously I can't see those animals, but they have a vet, you know, like in that they go to in like one client in Prague or whatever, Prague MORPHs, and they have a vet there and they have my book and they know who I am. And he goes in and we work as a team. Like and they're thrilled to have my 35 years of knowledge, you know, to add into it, you know, and then that way yeah.
I don't want to interrupt you there, but with
please, that's it. Yeah.
With that being said, is the vet that the guy's dealing with in Prague, or me, for example, up here in Wisconsin, are these other reptile vets, or are they just, you know, like large animal vets? I mean, do you find it's easy to work with those kind of people, with those vets as well?
Yeah. It can be either or. Like sometimes, like the veterinarians in Prague, they actually do some exotic animal medicine and do work on reptiles, but because they have my book or whatever, and they know that I have this crazy passion and have all this experience, they're thrilled. Like he goes in and says, hey, I had a consult with Dr. Stahl last night about this case, and he's saying maybe we should consider this. And some veterinarians might get offended by that. You got it's a delicate thing, right?
That's what I was asking.
Yes. And so that's the problem is so they're like, they welcome it, right? Because they're like, oh my God, this sounds fantastic. You know, yeah, let's do that, because that's what he's recommending. And so it just depends. A lot of dog and cat vets that are kind enough to say, hey, you know what? I don't work on a lot of reptiles, but I know there's nobody for you to go to within 300 miles of me. And if I'm willing to, you know, try to help you, because a lot of veterinarians, they want to help, right? And some of them are thrilled. Some of them are thrilled to say, hey, I work with a reptile vet. He's far away, but we consult, and, you know, or maybe they have the book too, because that helps, because they know that, okay, this guy knows something, right? He's just not some crazy quack. And they are willing to do that, you know? So it depends. So sometimes finding a vet that is open to that can be useful as well.
My first vet was like that. Katie Phillips in Colorado Springs. She was like brand new exotic vet, and she really didn't know much about, you know, working with reptiles. And at that time, you know, I was doing rescue work, and she was like, hey, and she really wanted to learn, you know, so I bought the vet manual, you know, and I would bring it in with me, and she offered to treat all of the rescues for free, just so that she could learn. And like the only thing I had to pay for was, you know, the cost of the medications, you know, cost of things, you know, materials and things like that. I mean, she was fantastic. Like, I love her to death. I mean, she even tried, like, one time we got this blue tongue skink that had a burn on its eyelid. And when the scab came off, he couldn't close his eyes. So she was like, hey, would you mind if I tried to do reconstructive eyelid surgery on this blue tongue skink? Yes. And I was like, oh my God, like, go for it. You know? And
it's funny you say that. I don't mean to interrupt you, but I actually know of that eye transplant surgery, and I was wondering, I was like, you know, what do you possibly use? And the vet had told me they used skin from circumcision. And I was like, wow, really? He said, yeah, that surgery went great, but the animal's a little cockeyed now.
Okay, buddy.
I had to do it. I had to do it. But so with that being said, we're at an hour, and I know your time is very valuable, Scott. And again, I appreciate you so much for agreeing to come on here. I hope you'll come back for 2.1 when we get into something a little deeper, maybe a subject of your choosing. But I also wanted to say that I got to give a special thank to Nick Lillis, who actually, started the ball rolling with me and you. We've had, the other day we had a really nice conversation for quite a while. And man, I just, you're a fantastic guy. Your passion is obvious. And anybody, who's, looking for, in my opinion, the best, you get a hold of Dr. Scott. He'll consult for you. He can consult for you through another vet, whatever the case may be. Get that big ass book, because any of my family who's watching, that's my birthday present. I want that book. So, again,
Amazon link.
Yeah. But here's the thing. Then I got to send it to Scott. I need it autographed.
Of course, dude. Well, we'll get that done. Absolutely.
All right.
Yes,
well,
yeah.
Go
if you have
on.
any trouble finding it, let us know. But yeah, it's on Amazon. It's the newest one. It's got a green cover on it with a bunch of crazy looking animals on it or whatever. It's called Mater's Reptile and Amphibian Medicine and Surgery.
Yeah,
so,
show it to us one more time. Show it to us one more time.
You got it.
Here's
what it looks like.
All right,
there we go.
There
you go.
Yeah.
Nice. Beautiful.
Yeah, totally worth the money. Totally worth the money.
Yeah, I mean, again, I always tell people you can do kettlebell swings with it if you don't want to read it.
I was going to say, when my wife gets mad, I hope that thing ain't in reaching distance, because, man, I'll be knocked out.
She will take you out. Yeah.
So Scott, is there anything else you want to say? Maybe how people can get a hold of you, if you want people to get a hold of you, if you don't, anything that's coming up that you'd be interested in sharing with their audience?
Yeah, thanks for that. So I've actually started, I have an Instagram I just started, which I'll be adding to. It's called IB and then _ the Reptile Vet. So you can find me on there. Maybe you guys can link that for me. I just started that, so I'll start putting up a lot more reptile surgeries and just some interesting things you guys might enjoy. And then this consulting, I do actually do a lot of large collection consulting as well. So if people are interested that are breeders and are working with a large number of animals and they want to consult with me, my email is sstahldvm@gmail.com. And then the name of the practice is Stahl, you see it at the bottom there, Stahl Exotic Animal Veterinary Services. You can send an email to info@seeves.com, and that goes to my business manager, and she can forward that to me. That's probably easier to remember than what I just mentioned to you. And then hopefully I'll see you guys at some conference coming up.
Reptile Talks in May.
Reptile Talks, yes. They were kind enough to ask me to lecture there last year, so I think this year I'll get to come and maybe just listen to Uncle Mike teach us how to breed monitors. That'll be very cool. And anyway, so thanks for the time. And I think next time when we come back, we'll dig deeper into some of the health problems of specifically monitors, because I'm sure a bunch of you kind of want to know some of my experiences with some of the more common conditions that we see in monitors, and we can jump into that. So.
Absolutely. I wanted to hit on the, how, because I get so much of it, imported animals, they're starting to decline. What can I do? And I used to try to walk people through. And then I've noticed that me not being a vet has actually done more harm than good for the animal. So I throw my hands up and I say, you have to go to a vet. You have to be seen by a vet. And, because again, I'm way out of my league there. And for people to think that, I mean, I do some things here myself, doctor, we talked about it, and it's not real rocket science, but I've been doing it a long time. So if you don't quite know what you're doing, you over medicate or you under medicate, you're going to cause yourself all kinds of problems. So go out there and especially Dr. Scott, what a great guy. He loves these animals. His passion is obvious. So skip Uncle Mike. Go right to the doctor. Go to the doctor.
Just to show you how much we love monitors, we actually have it as part of one of our logos. So there you
Very
go.
cool.
Love it.
Of course, everybody thinks they're having sex, though, and I have to say, no, these are males in combat, guys. I'm not wearing an X-rated shirt around. Sorry.
Right.
Anyway. But no, and I want to also let you guys know that I'm a monitor. I was able to breed black tree monitors about 20 years ago. That was one of the greatest things I was ever able to accomplish, was to be able to do that. I'll tell you a story about that when we get back together again. I've got a fun one on that. So anyway, but
greatly appreciated. One more story, if you don't mind, if you can give us another couple minutes. Can you explain to me, because I hate tapeworms and I love the way praziquantel works. Can you just tell us what it does to a tapeworm?
That's a good question. So the dose that we typically use is about 8 milligrams per kilogram, and it's parenteral, or you can either do it orally or by injection. And I believe what it does is it disintegrates. So the adult tapeworm, the way that it works is it's got this disgusting head on it or whatever, and it's literally embedded in the wall of the stomach or the intestine, right? And then it has those lovely little packets that are attached to it, right? And those little guys, like, they snap off and then go out with the stool, and then that's how they infect another species, right? So I believe the praziquantel actually causes it breaks down the barrier that keeps the parasite from being able to survive the acid environment. So in other words, in order for that tapeworm to live in the intestinal tract, it has to be able to survive the harshness of the acids, if you will, the digestive enzymes. And so what it does is it's got this protective mechanisms so it can survive in that medium. And I think the praziquantel somehow affects the ability for the skin, if you will, or the outdoor coating of that parasite to not be affected, and then it basically gets digested or broken down by the animal's normal acid levels. So pretty cool.
Love it. That's one creature that I enjoy hearing how they die.
Yeah, they're disgusting.
They are
nothing more disgusting than a tapeworm. I totally agree.
It's true, back in the early days of medicine, like for people with weight loss and stuff, didn't they actually put that like in somebody?
What?
What? I think they did.
I think you're right.
Weight loss.
That's probably been done.
Yeah. But then, of course, they go back and they eradicate it once they reach their goal of weight or whatever the case may be. But I don't know, man. The leeches for bloodletting and tapeworms for weight loss. You know what? I'd rather go exercise.
Yeah, that's gross. That's a no-go. Yeah.
Have you ever seen that show, Monsters Inside Me?
Oh, yeah.
Oh my God.
Crazy.
I haven't seen that. I'll have to check it out.
Oh, it's crazy.
All about parasites. All about parasites.
Oh, wonderful.
So again, we're at an hour and it looks like about an hour and 12 minutes, something like that. Dr. Scott, thank you so much for coming on. And we really appreciate you. Keep up your good work. I can't wait to shake your hand in Anaheim. And again, we'll stay in touch. Me and you got something going on right now. So I'll be back in contact with you. Everybody, Dr. Scott Stahl.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, Kat. Appreciate all the help.
Yeah. So much. It's been so nice to talk with you.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Have a great Saturday, everybody.
You too. Thank you, doctor.
Talk soon, babe. All right.
All right.
Now.
All right. And I'm having the same trouble as before. Hold on.
Take us out. We got to say goodbye to all our peeps. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for your comments. Jim, Mike,
subscribe.
Yeah, like, subscribe, donate to Mike, to Uncle Mike directly. But no, any kind of super chats that come through this podcast, after YouTube gets their cut or whatever it is, we give it all to USARC. So again, thank you so much for filling in for my partner, Jen. And we will see you in 2 weeks. Hold on a second. Let me see who we got in 2 weeks. Oh, gosh. Hold on. Let's see who we got in 2 weeks. We got Tam Nagayan. So we're looking forward to having Tam on. Thank you very much. I think we're over. Thank you, guys.
I found it. Yeah, thank you so much, guys. Have a great weekend.
Thanks, Kat. Bye now.